morning, Chris. How are you today?
Hi, Ron. Doing great. Looking forward to diving in on the marketplace types that we're going to be talking about today. And for a lot of folks, they hear these acronyms all the time, Ron, and some of them don't make sense. They may know what they technically mean, but they don't have
Right.
great examples. So we're going to spend just a few minutes and give everyone some detail around these different types of marketplaces in today's discussion.
Sounds great. So first off, let's go ahead and lightly define what a marketplace is, because there's quite a few different types, right? We're going to cover them. So for me, and then I'll turn it over to you and give your thing. A marketplace is where we allow more than one person into the place selling, like a flea market, right? That's a marketplace. You got a whole bunch of different people selling their wares, right? Amazon, you've got millions of sellers up there selling their wares. That's a marketplace. eBay, that's an auction marketplace. Everybody up there selling their wares, right? So for me, a marketplace is really just an e-commerce or an auction site that allows more than one seller. Now, there's a lot of different nuances to that, and I think that's what the different types it covers. Is there anything else you want to add to the definition before we kind of dive into all the types?
I think that was great. And I would just throw one note out there just as far as a percentage. The percentage of total online sales is substantially marketplace based, especially if you include some of the different auction platforms, like you mentioned with eBay, for example. The overall online marketplace for online sales is somewhere around 60 to 70+% coming from marketplace sites. So if you
Right.
hear the phrase marketplace and you think, oh, that's a nice little segment, oh, that's cool. It's actually the vast majority of online sales are going through marketplaces. So just think about
Right.
that and let that resonate. And that really edifies why we want to go into the different types of marketplaces so we can clarify around these and again, sort of put some meat on the bones with some examples of these types of marketplaces.
Sounds good. So the first one let's talk about the obvious one. We've already mentioned Amazon, so we'll talk about the seller marketplace, right? And sometimes we call this C2C, right? Consumer to consumer. So Ron, I could go on Amazon if I wanted to, and I could sell, you know, Pokemon cards, and Chris could buy them. And that would be a consumer to consumer transaction. I'm not really a business, I'm a consumer and I'm selling to you. So the Amazon is both a C2C and a B2C, right? Because businesses are also selling a lot on Amazon to consumers. And then there's some B2B there too. I mean, I know Clarity's a business and we buy a lot of our stuff from Amazon. So really, Amazon is one of those types of seller marketplaces where the sellers could be consumers or businesses selling to businesses or consumers. What else do you think about seller marketplaces, Chris?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because you can have scenarios where you get really high dollar seller, C2C type of scenarios, but it's a lot less common. And,
Right.
we'll sort of talk about this B2B type of scenario. But typically with C2C, it's going to be a lower cost, higher frequency, and in many cases, like proximate to each other, physically proximate to each other. Otherwise, there has to be a lot of sort of logistical coordination. A lot of companies like Etsy and Amazon do this quite well, but it does require a lot of governance whenever you have that in place. So I think those are great examples. I would just include, sort of the nuance that it tends to be self-restricting because of that reason.
Right. Yeah. Which Amazon, to be fair to my example, wasn't really fair because it's not directly seller, right? Like you said, sellers are mostly C2C. The second one on our list here, the vendor marketplace, Amazon even has Vendor Central, right? And they've even got a whole section for vendors and vendors uploading their products and managing their orders and things like that. So Amazon is kind of a hybrid of a seller and a vendor marketplace. So the vendor marketplace is more about the B2C and the B2B, and that's where the vendors are going to go in there and do that. And we've done a number of these. Go ahead and talk about, Chris, if you want, a couple of the projects that we've done and your thoughts on the vendor marketplaces.
Absolutely. So this one's really interesting for a lot of our clients that we work with. And ultimately, one of the big challenges with vendor marketplaces is they tend to be selling things that are more complex or require a lot more detail to fulfill. One example is a pool company that has essentially relationships, and it's really a buying group or a group purchasing organization. But effectively, it is a marketplace because we have all of these different vendors that we're collaboratively bringing into this marketplace and enabling the different buyers to access these folks. There's a membership that's involved, and based on the purchases within a certain time period, there are rewards. Generally speaking, the concept of the vendor marketplace tends to be around physical items, but we have a lot of our clients that we work with who offer some form of membership to sort of enhance that. I mean, think about Amazon Prime, it's a similar concept, but enhance the offer, maybe offer more rewards or a bigger discount, these kind of things for a bigger commitment that they might make. In addition, you'll also see a lot of actual services that can be offered too with some of the different marketplaces that we've done. So it's not just restricted to physical items. It can be digital items, digital products, or even services as well. So it can really span the gamut. But generally, another example is we work with a lot of groups that supply physical items for franchises. This is a pretty classic example where a franchise needs equipment. Maybe they need all of the different, logo branded apparel for their location when they spin up a new store for all their team members. These are the types of things that you typically are going to see in these type of marketplaces. And they can be highly customized. They can be highly catered to that exact vendor's sort of customization for their end user.
Yeah, the thing that's kind of unique about these vendor and buying group marketplaces is the shipping, right? Because when I go to Amazon, and if I don't buy via Prime, right, typically Prime means that that's one of the few items that FBA, Amazon, is actually stocking on behalf of the sellers. And so Amazon can guarantee to ship it quickly. Although they just announced in the news that Prime doesn't guarantee 2-day shipping anymore. So now I'm not really sure what we get with our Prime memberships. But with these vendors and buying groups, if I go to Amazon and I buy 6 items, there's a likelihood that those 6 items could be coming from 6 different vendors, and it has to be drop shipped from each of those locations. So when you're looking for a platform, ensure that the platform can handle either split or targeted shipping. And what that typically means is when they go to place an order, the platform is smart enough to know where each item is being fulfilled from. And if 3 items are coming from one vendor and the other 3 items are 3 different vendors, it literally splits it into 4 separate orders so that it can send those orders to those 4 different vendors for fulfillment. And then those 4 vendors have a separate sub order that when they reissue back their tracking status and or delayed status or whatever the status might be, they can contact those sellers directly, independently of each other. There's a lot of complexity there that these vendor and buying group marketplaces need. So make sure when you're researching the platform to ask those types of questions, especially about the vendor and buying groups. So buying groups, very similar to vendor, almost wholly buying group marketplaces or vendor marketplaces. But as you just talked about, they usually have that additional membership, rewards points, different levels, things like that. Let's move on to the next one, which is auctions. This is a great one, right? Because this one can be super complex, and we've designed, and we're building a really big one right now, but we've designed some really big real estate auctions that have added some very unique and interesting concepts. So one of the things, and I'll just mention 2 or 3, and then I'll hand it over to you on auction, are the different auction types that you could have. I mean, I'm doing another white paper right now on auction types, and I was surprised how many different types of auctions there can be, silent auctions and Vicky auctions and reverse auctions. I mean, there's just all kinds of crazy different auctions, right? And then you've got this whole concept of auctions. Well, then you've got consignment. And then with consignment, you've got different percentages of commissions and how to pay and track. I mean, so they can be really complex. So why don't you dive in a little bit to the auction marketplaces, and let's talk about that.
Yeah, so this, of course, is going to include some of the standard scenarios like an eBay. And we certainly want to point out the sheer magnitude of that site in and of itself. It is a massive, massive site with a lot of market share. And just in general, though, the concept is going to be that for a lot of clients, for a lot of folks spinning up an auction marketplace, there's probably some niche aspect to it that's really specific, that's going to be driving, your specific value in the market. And that's really what we want to focus on here with the auctions is what types of auctions are you going to be running? What is the governance? And like you talked about, Ron, with the real estate scenario, with the auctions for cars, we've done some really interesting things with car auction sites, as well as just overall lots and being able to purchase lots, this kind of thing. It has to be easy for the seller to list their items. And really sort of a constant that you'll hear that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about in the background is governance, and really having sort of training wheels for both the seller and the buyer. And whenever you're dealing with auctions, especially if it's high value auctions, but even for smaller auctions, it's really important that expectations are managed on all sides and that both the buyer and the seller know what to expect throughout that process. For some, this can be a really high purchase amount. So they're going to need to qualify and go through that process. Whenever they actually go to purchase, they need to be able to properly fulfill the purchase. And then the person delivering the item or handing it over or transferring ownership needs to go through that process properly. And there may need to be escrow, etc. So those are some of the common scenarios.
All right, so that about covers auction sites. So let's go ahead, Chris, and let's talk about one of the unique features that I really love about the Clarity e-commerce platform, and some other platforms have this, but I've seen some clients that like a multi-branded store. Do you want to give us an idea of what a multi-branded marketplace or a multi-branded storefront looks like?
And thanks, Ron. This is a really interesting topic for a lot of companies because you may have a general audience, a niche that you really want to present to. Now, this niche could be based on a specific category that you want to focus on, with different product types and the related marketing and branding. It could be a specific region of the world. It could be a country or even a part of the country. It could be a very specific company that you want to target that you're working with. It's maybe a large representation of your top line revenue comes from, or large amount comes from that particular client. Whatever it is, you want the ability with a marketplace to be able to focus on and cater to the niche offerings that you can provide in the market. And so this capability to have a multi-branded store, it really allows you to set up multiple, it can be, a single additional or literally an unlimited number of additional stores that can be catered to the different areas that I just listed out and more. And basically the concept is they can have their own subdirectory, subdomain, or completely separate domain. You can have their own branding and styling, or they can inherit from the standard branding and styling, but maybe have a slight variation. For example, one of the things that was really interesting, Ron, on some of our recent work was we had a marketplace that was a general marketplace, but the company itself had several clients that were very large, and they wanted them to have their own branded, individualized portals that they could go to, essentially. And so whenever those customers log in and go to their portal, it's actually a unique access point for them. And therefore, they don't have to deal with all of the otherwise confusing branding that, would be relatively generic. They can see their logo, they can see their information, and it's isolated just to them. And then, of course, different companies can be sent to different domains. Again, this can also be something where, it's possibly a OEM manufacturer who is producing parts, and maybe they produce parts for motorcycles and automobiles. And now they've decided that they want to start producing them for, large commercial vehicles. And so they might want to have separate sites or this multi-branding for each of those. So those might be a few examples that would apply here.
Got it. So it's kind of like it's a centralized back end, but we have a separate website on the front end that could be fully branded for them. So some of the conversations that we've had with some clients and some of the implementations that we've done is kind of like you said, where there's a specific marketplace. And then for different reasons, one might be, well, John Deere sells on my website, so I have their parts embedded within all ours. But a lot of people want to go to just look at the John Deere stuff, or conversely, I could have a big, huge client like Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola is buying from my store. I carry 10,000 SKUs, but Coca-Cola has only approved 500 SKUs from my storefront. So I'm going to create a separate storefront just for Coca-Cola, that entry point portal you talked about. And when a Coca-Cola employee logs in there to buy from that storefront, only the 500 products that are approved by Coca-Cola to be purchased by their employees would be in that storefront. Is that kind of where you're headed? So it's kind of a two-factor. It could be one where you've got a big vendor that's really high profile, like a John Deere, so you want to give them their own storefront. But you might also have a big client that when they come to your marketplace, they don't want to see the noise of your marketplace. They only want to see the products that they've approved for their employees to buy. So you actually create them maybe a filtered view might be a good way to look at it. It's a separate URL, a separate domain, maybe even branded for that client, but a separate portal view into your marketplace that really controls the experience that they want from you. Is that the two main scenarios we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think a filtered view is a great way of staying it. And what's really cool is, like you're implying and really clarifying here, is that it's possible to sort of deploy that in its own unique marketing site, which is really, really powerful. So this can include things like customizing the payment gateway, the payment terms, the options that we present in the UI. I mean, the list goes on. And really the bottom line is, like you said as well, this centralized backend, standard set of integrations. Essentially, we want to continue to reduce and just reduce overhead and streamline your operations, leveraging this software. That's what it was designed for from the beginning.
Right.
And so fundamentally, you're going to see that throughout the DNA of how we've architected it. But yeah, I think that was a great explanation.
So it's kind of that full circle. Well, any closing thoughts, Chris?
I would just say that, each of these topics are really detailed, and depending on where you're going with your marketplace platform, you absolutely have an option and a resource with the Clarity team to be able to get complimentary, just, specific to your business and your scenario, complimentary discovery and just suggestions and consultation that truly is, no sales, complimentary. We want to help. And of course, if there's a good fit for us to collaborate together, great. But if not, we'll point you in a direction that, we think based on our experience is going to be best for your marketplace. Certainly, if you found this valuable, we would certainly appreciate if you would smash the like button and hit subscribe. And other than that, we'll look forward to seeing you all in the next video.
All right. Stay tuned, folks. Next video is on scalability and customizations of your marketplace. Bye for now.
Thanks, Ron. Bye for now.